Okay, so you want to own motorcycle dealerships. Not one shop with a sign out front and a guy named Gary who's worked the parts counter since 1994. You want a group. A rooftop here, a rooftop there, Harley in one state, Honda and Yamaha in another, maybe a marine or power sports line thrown in for good measure. You picture yourself building the next regional power sports empire, buying up small operators one at a time until you're the name every manufacturer calls first when a struggling dealer needs an exit. Sounds simple? It is not. This is a business where the manufacturer can end your franchise agreement at will, where a single slow winter can wipe out a year of profit, and where the industry's single most iconic brand is currently shedding dealers by the dozen, month after month. Owning one dealership is a bet on a location. Owning many is a bet on an entire industry, and by most measures, that industry is smaller today than it was 20 years ago. There's no single version of this business. At the bottom sits the single point independent dealer. One franchise, one town, often family run for decades, living or dying on local loyalty. Above that are regional dealer groups, typically 5 to 20 stores, frequently multi-line, carrying Honda, Kawasaki, and Polaris under one ownership umbrella, specifically to spread manufacturer risk across brands that rise and fall on different cycles. At the very top sit the public and private equity-backed consolidators, the rumble-ons and ride-nows of the world, who don't think in terms of individual stores at all. They think in rooftops, EBITDA multiples, and market share across a genuinely fragmented industry that's never had a dominant national player the way auto retail does. Each tier plays an entirely different game with its lenders and its manufacturers. The single point owner negotiates one franchise agreement and lives or dies by one brand's product cycle. A bad model year, and the whole store feels it immediately. The regional multi-line group spreads that risk across brands but takes on the operational complexity of running several distinct sales cultures, several sets of factory incentive programs, and several completely different customer bases under one payroll. The institutional consolidator solves that complexity with standardized back-office systems, centralized inventory management across the whole portfolio, and enough scale to negotiate better financing terms than any single dealer could get alone. But it also takes on portfolio-wide exposure the moment any one region or brand softens, since a downturn in Sunbelt watercraft sales or Rust Belt snowmobile demand shows up on the same consolidated balance sheet. That fragmentation is exactly what institutional buyers are chasing. Acquiring a single small-town dealership might run anywhere from $350,000 to $2 million, depending on the brand, the real estate, and the size of the floor plan inventory you're inheriting. According to powersports focused business lenders, a full-line franchise store carrying a premium brand with a large service bay can run well past that ceiling. But buying an existing multi-store group is an entirely different transaction. When Rumble On acquired Ride Now Powersports, the nation's largest powersports retailer, in 2021, the deal was valued at more than $575 million. For a company that had generated close to $900 million in revenue and roughly $96.6 million in adjusted EBITDA the year before. That's the institutional price of admission. Not a single showroom, but an entire distribution network spanning dozens of markets, financed with hundreds of millions in debt and stock. What the acquisition price rarely reflects is what's already sitting on the balance sheet of every store inside that group. Each rooftop carries its own floor plan debt, the specialized loan used to finance new and used inventory sitting on the lot, often running from $200,000 to well over $1 million per location, and every dollar of it accrues interest for as long as a bike sits unsold. Buy a 10-store group and you inherit 10 separate floor plan lines, 10 manufacturer relationships, each with their own volume quotas and stair-step incentive targets, and, quite often, facilities built during a boom decade that now cost a fortune to heat. Cool, staff, and insure. Some of those buildings were expanded specifically to meet a manufacturer's facility image requirements: dedicated showroom square footage, a minimum number of service bays, branded signage packages, obligations that came with the franchise agreement, and don't disappear just because sales have slowed. Roll all of that up, and you also inherit the manufacturer's approval process itself. Franchise agreements aren't freely transferable, and an OEM can veto whoever tries to take over a location it's unhappy with, regardless of what price you've agreed to pay or how many other stores in the portfolio are performing well. Here's where it gets genuinely interesting. Because a motorcycle group isn't really one business, it's four businesses quietly sharing a roof. New unit sales look like the core product. the thing that draws people through the door. But they carry the thinnest margin in the building, often somewhere between 4 and 12% gross, and compressing further on premium cruiser brands, where manufacturers protect showroom traffic and market share over profit per unit. Used bikes run meaningfully richer, frequently 15 to 25%, since there's no factory pricing floor to negotiate against. Parts and accessories are where money quietly piles up. Margins in the 35 to 45% range on gear, apparel, and aftermarket components that customers rarely think to negotiate. Then there's finance and insurance. Financing packages, extended service contracts, and prepaid maintenance plans sold at the moment of purchase, contributing anywhere from 20 to 30% of a dealership's total gross profit, despite representing only a sliver of total revenue. The counterintuitive part every operator learns eventually is that the department drawing customers through the door, new bike sales, is often the least profitable one in the building. It exists almost entirely to feed the other three. Running all four departments at scale means recurring costs that never really let up. Payroll for sales staff, service technicians, and parts counter employees across every location. Floor plan interest that climbs the moment rates rise, or inventory sits past its season. Facility overhead on buildings that, in many cases, were expanded and renovated during a boom era the industry hasn't seen in over a decade. But the single structural point of failure in this business is manufacturer dependence. Lose a franchise agreement, and you don't just lose future sales, you lose the right to perform warranty work, order genuine factory parts, and display the brand name on your own building. A group holding 15 Harley-Davidson stores isn't running 15 independent businesses. It's running one very large bet on a single manufacturer's health, multiplied by 15 buildings and 15 payrolls. Which brings us to the case study, and it isn't a hypothetical. It's unfolding in real time. Harley-Davidson sold roughly 344,000 motorcycles worldwide in 2006, at the peak of the era that built most of today's dealer network. By 2024, that figure had fallen to just over 151,000, a decline of about 45% over the past decade alone. Even as the company posted a genuinely strong quarterly profit of $377 million in the third quarter of 2025, more than triple the same period a year earlier. That contradiction is the whole story in miniature. The parent company can look healthy on paper while the network of independent owners underneath it quietly bleeds out store by store. Under CEO Jochen Zeitz, the U.S. dealer count fell from roughly 700 to around 600 in just 4 years. These closures aren't abstractions on a spreadsheet. A family-owned San Francisco dealership that had operated for more than a century shut its doors in 2024, only 6 years after new ownership took over, and struggled to keep pace with corporate standards. A nearly 30-year-old New York City shop folded entirely, liquidating its remaining inventory at discounts up to 75% on its way out the door. High Country Harley-Davidson, with locations spanning Colorado and Wyoming, posted an emotional farewell and closed in 2025 after 25 years in business. George Gatto, chairman of the Harley-Davidson Dealer Council, told the trade press the problem in one blunt sentence: there are simply too many dealers chasing too few new bike sales. Layer tariffs on top of that, which cost Harley $27 million in a single quarter of 2025 alone, and you have a manufacturer effectively telling its own dealer network that the road ahead means fewer storefronts, not more. Zoom out, and the entire industry is being reshaped by two forces working at once. On one side, an aging customer base, Harley's core buyer has always skewed older and wealthier, and younger riders have been slow to replace them. Despite electric and adventure touring models aimed squarely at that generational gap, including a lower-priced model line the company plans to introduce in 2026 specifically to court younger, price-sensitive riders. On the other side, consolidation. RumbleOn's e-commerce platform and RideNow's brick-and-mortar footprint merged specifically because the powersports retail market, worth more than $100 billion nationally, was described by its own executives as highly fragmented, genuinely ripe for the kind of roll-up that reshaped auto retail a generation earlier. The smart operators aren't fighting that fragmentation. They're buying directly into it, betting that scale, shared back-office systems, and diversified brand portfolios across many manufacturers can survive conditions that increasingly sink any single independent dealership standing alone. Run the numbers on a good year against a bad one, and the gap is thinner than the aspirational version of this business ever lets on. In a healthy year, a multi-store group sees new and used unit sales humming through spring and summer. Service bays booked solid through riding season. F&I penetration strong on nearly every deal. Parts and accessories moving briskly alongside every sale. And net margins landing somewhere in the 5 to 7% range on total revenue. Genuinely excellent by dealership standards, where most operators land closer to 2 to 5% even in ordinary years, and plenty land at or below break even. A bad year looks entirely different with the exact same buildings and the exact same staff on payroll. Inventory bloats over a slow winter that never quite clears out. Floor plan interest keeps compounding daily on unsold stock nobody's buying. A key manufacturer trims next year's allocation after the group misses its volume targets. And that same group can slide to a 1% margin or a flat loss without a single visible thing on the showroom floor having changed. The difference between those 2 years often comes down to nothing more dramatic than 3 or 4 fewer sales per store per month, compounded across every location in the portfolio. Motorcycle retail runs on famously thin overall net margins, which means a handful of soft quarters or one manufacturer's difficult decade can turn a working business into a liability almost overnight. The building with the manufacturer's name lit up out front was never really the business. The actual business is the 4 departments quietly working underneath it. Service bays, parts counters, finance desks, propping up a showroom that mostly exists to bring people through the front door in the first place. Own enough of those buildings, and you're not really betting on motorcycles at all. You're betting on how many people still want to walk through that door. In a country where, for the first time in decades, that number keeps getting smaller every single year.